Hey everyone, what is going on? My name is Live and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking again about Payday 3. In the third video I've done in the last year, this time I want to focus on a very specific field when it comes to what Payday 3 might contain when the game is released, if it does still come out. There are several different topics and themes I want to discuss, and several I asked you guys to give me suggestions for in the community tab on my channel, so I will get to those eventually. But as I've said before, I don't want to become the allié of Payday 3. I just think a good video here every now and again, just keeping the discussion alive, and just every now and again reminding people that Payday 3 is still happening is a good idea, rather than doing one every week or every 2 weeks, which I do not want to do, because at this point when there's literally no information confirmed, I don't want to be the guy who's just pushing stuff down people's throats. But we're at that point where I think it's been long enough since the last video where it's worth going back and picking a topic and just going into a bit more detail and discussing the pros and cons of certain things. So today, we're going to be talking about whether or not Payday 3 should start with old characters or wipe the slate clean and start with new characters. So, without further ado, let's get into the debate and talk about the pros and cons of each side. So I would say this topic was the most requested one when I asked people for ideas on what things they'd like to see me discuss for Payday 3, and that's because it's probably one of the most important topics when it comes to Payday 3, because the gameplay and the skills and the inventory and all that can have its own little quirks here and there, and there's plenty there that can be discussed, but who you're playing as is one of the most important parts of the game, not to mention the people you interact with while playing. So, will the Payday 2 gang return for the third game, or will they wipe the slate clean and go with completely new characters? For those of you who need a reminder, at the end of Payday 2, in the good ending titled Offshore Payday, there was a 7.5-minute cutscene where they basically explained that all the gang members had gone off to do their own things, lived their own lives, and Bane had become the president of the United States, completed the greatest heist of all time, and everything the gang needs to do had been completed. There was no real reason or any hint even, or like a mid-credit scene if you want to put it that way. There was no kind of hint or any kind of suggestion that they were going to come back and do more heisting. They basically said that was it, their story is over, that's the end, that's the break-off point for the gang. And it is strongly hinted that the world believes that the Payday gang were all killed in the White House heist, and so they were able to slip away and retire with very little retaliation from the police. And so at that point, everyone believed that there was no reason for the Payday gang to come back in and do more heisting. Now, in my last Payday 3 video I uploaded not long after this was released, I basically said the only way they could get out of it is that potentially before they actually do retire and before the rumors and stories cutscene, which you also got with the good ending, which basically explained what happened to the gang over the years after the end of Payday 2, I suggested that somewhere in between the ending cutscene and these rumors and stories surfacing, there could be room for potentially one more game. But I've looked back on that and I'm not quite sure that I believe that anymore. I think that would be pushing it a bit too much to slide something in there and say, oh, actually, you know, they had retired, but they did a few more heists anyway for the fun of it. It just, I don't really think that sounds right to me. I don't think it sits right with me. So instead, I'm going to go through with a few more details and explain why I think there's more of a chance that we could have either completely new characters or a mix of new and old. So Payday 3 was confirmed nearly 3 years ago now when Overkill and Starbreeze bought the entire rights to the Payday franchise and at the same time released Update 100 on PC. At the time, they just said it was in development and shared no further information, and whenever they've been asked since then, they've refused to comment on anything going on with the game. Now, as we know, development will have paused while Starbreeze is in reconstruction, but Payday 3 is still very much on the horizon, provided the company doesn't go under completely. So there's no reason to assume we won't get information sometime soon about Payday 3, but in the meantime, I wanted to discuss what I thought about this debate as to whether or not we'll get new characters or old. So, to start off with, let's talk about the voice actors who actually have some involvement in the game. Because the way that I've seen it and the way that it's come across to me recently over the last half a year or so, since I interviewed Damien Poitier back in September, it's starting to become more clear to me that the voice actors in Overkill have a much closer relationship than I would wager a lot of companies have with their talent. Damien Poitier, for those of you who need context, is the voice of Chains, has been since the start of Payday 2, and also in any live action clips. But Damien has also said that he's not just close with Overkill and Almir and a lot of the people working there, he's also best friends with Eric Etabari, who is the face and live action representation of Dallas, not the voice in-game, because that's a different actor, Simon Kerr. I'm not actually quite sure how that happened, maybe at some point I can figure it out, but the point is, Damien's really good with Eric, he knows a lot of the other voice actors, and a lot of the other voice actors know each other, and in turn they all know Overkill as well. There's a very close bond between them, and it is completely safe to say that a lot of these voice actors, if not all of them, will be more than happy to return and have at least some involvement in Payday 3, if not a great deal. Damien has said he'd love to, Ian Russell, the voice and face of Locke, has said he'd love to as well. I presume a lot of the other voice actors would as well, but I don't have direct contact methods with all of them, so I can't really get through to them and find out their opinions. But I think it's safe to say that Damien and Eric won't be the only people who are more than willing to come right back in and help out with Payday 3. So because of that, it's smart to assume that they will at least have some involvement in Payday 3, with people being as keen as they are, and with the relationships between them being as strong as they are, it just makes sense for them to come back and have at least some involvement. But just because Overkill get on well and have a good relationship and rapport with the people who worked on Payday 2, doesn't mean there isn't room for new voice actors. And to represent my point here, I'm going to talk about how Payday 2 started off. As you all know, when Payday 2 first released, there were only 4 characters: Dallas, Wolf, Hoxton, and Chains. Now, Dallas and Wolf were the only 2 characters to return to the game at base when it launched in August 2013, reprising their roles from the first game. Chains had an original voice actor in the first game called Howard Thompson, who did not reprise his role going into Payday 2. That's how Damien Poitier took over and filled his shoes and started playing Chains himself. And on top of that, for those of you who probably know by now, you've played Hoxton Breakout, you know how it's all worked. Pete Gold was unable to reprise his role at the time. He didn't refuse coming back into the game, it just didn't work in terms of schedules. So he wasn't in the base game, but fans kept asking for him to come back. So when he had the time and he could spare it to come back, he arranged it, and Overkill made the Hoxton Breakout heist, and that's how Hoxton came back in, and the new Hoxton became known as Houston. The interesting thing to note, however, and this is something else Damien revealed in his interview, is that he had no idea how Howard Thompson had played Chains in Payday the Heist. He didn't do any background research. Damien went in and did his own take on Chains. He was given the information and he went, right, here's how I see him, here's how I'm going to play him, and he went from there. So, ignoring the fact that he is still playing a character who was in the first game, Chains in Payday 2 is technically a new character compared to the way he was in Payday the Heist. Obviously, in terms of lore, Chains was there before Payday 2, but in terms of how he was represented, how the actor played him, it's a completely new character. It has been since 2013. And on top of that, Houston is now in his own right a new character as well. So we can say loosely that really Payday 2 only started with 2 original characters and 2 new ones, obviously excluding what I've said about lore, etc. So you can already say, well, alright, Payday 2, the way that game is, and it's added a ton of new characters, that didn't even start with the original 4 anyway. So what's to say Payday 3 has to do that as well? It doesn't. They could bring back 1 character, they could bring back 2, and they could add a ton of new characters in after that, because a lot of the characters released as DLC since the game's come out have gone down very well with fans. Some not so much, I'm aware of that, but some have gone down really well, and some have more of a cult following, like myself with Sydney. A lot of people don't like Sydney, but there are a few people like me who like her. Other characters such as Duke or Rust have more of a fan base, I would wager, so it very much depends on who was added. But Overkill did add some characters that people really liked after the game was released, and they were all new and entirely original. So it proves quite easily that Overkill can add new characters to Payday 3 and still make them really good and encourage people to play as them. What I was saying there about adding characters later in Payday 2's life is something I want to touch on later, but before I do that, there's one other point I want to cover, which is the issue of the announcer, and this can impact what characters come back into Payday 3, if any come back at all. Because now I think it's almost completely safe to say Bane will not be returning in Payday 3, regardless of what happens. Bane is now dead. In his body, in his form, he's gone. He's in the president's body. I don't really see it being logistically possible for the president of the United States to sit in the Oval Office surrounded by bodyguards or executives or whoever it may be, pop on a headset and go, guys, the thermal drill, go get it. It's not going to happen. It's not feasible. Not to mention Simon Viklund, the voice of Bane, left Overkill Software a few years ago to do more freelance composition work and ended up becoming a part of 10 Chambers Collective, the development team fronted by Wolf's former voice actor Ulf Anderson, who are making a brand new survival-style Payday 2 game called GTFO, which is expected to release later in 2019 on PC, with consoles unconfirmed at this time. The point is, Simon Viklund has a lot on his plate right now, and not to mention, when he did finish recording Bane's lines in the end of 2018, he did upload a video onto YouTube basically saying, this is a clip of me doing my final lines ever for Bane, and it was just a picture of him kind of welling up, getting ready to cry, and kind of trying to bring some more emotion out for his final lines. Presumably, I'm guessing the ones that play after you finish the White House, where he's basically saying, oh no, is this it? Oh god, kind of thing, as he's dying. I presume those were the lines, that's just my guess though. Point being, as I've said, he's got plenty on his plate. Simon Viklund does not have any reason to return. He's more than busy, and the way they've ended Bane's character and put him into the body of the president, there's no real need to follow that up. That's sorted. And then this goes back to my debate in the last Payday 3 video a few months ago, talking about whether I think that Dallas or Locke could replace his role, and I still stand by. Both of them are very good options. I think for Dallas, you've got to be careful which voice actor you actually bring in, because I feel like if you bring Simon Kerr in to voice Dallas as the announcer, I don't know whether I'd be able to take him seriously, and I mean that in the greatest respect to Simon, because he probably gets where I'm coming from if I say this. I've never spoken to him, but I hope he understands. But the whole, I'm dying, I need a medic bag kind of thing, I'm not doing a better impression than that, so don't ask for it. Point being, with that kind of style of voice, I don't know whether people could take announcements seriously, like, oh, the police are coming, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying everyone takes Bane 100% seriously, but he certainly would be a lot more serious than Dallas screaming about medic bags and then suddenly taking control of planning a heist. I think if anyone was going to take over, I would also prefer Locke, but I also think that Locke would be a better choice. I just personally think, because he's had the practice in Payday 2, for him to transfer into Payday 3 and be the full-time proper announcer would be a good call. That's just my opinion. But they could bring in somebody new if they want to. However, I would say that if they bring Locke back in, that is the ticket for them to bring old characters in from Payday 2. If they bring Locke in as the announcer, that is a very, very easy bridge to build to go, well, Locke remembers Chains from this heist, and Chains has got a bit of free time at the minute. He's in some hard times, and he wants to come back and do a few more heists. Let's bring him in as a DLC. Oh, Houston's having some hard times. Bring him back in. Oh, Clover's sick of being back in Ireland with Oldstone. Let's bring her back into the fold. There is plenty of opportunity if they have someone in there to connect the lore between the two games. If you bring in a fresh announcer, that then reduces the chance of setting up a connection between Payday 2 and Payday 3. If you have someone in there as Locke as a bridge to connect the second game with the third, makes it a lot easier to connect some of the characters with the new title, whilst also bringing in some new characters. But the last key point that I want to make comes back to something I said earlier in the video, which is talking about releasing characters as DLC. And it's very important that I remind everyone that just because a character isn't in the game to start with, that does not in any way, shape or form mean that the character can't come back later as DLC. Hoxton is the perfect example of that. I guarantee you, if Pete Gold hadn't had such an outcry to come back into the game once he actually had more time, he wouldn't have bothered recording lines. He'd have gone, you know what, people have got over the fact that I'm not in the second game, they've moved on, I'm happy to move on, onwards and upwards. But because they kept begging and begging, saying, Hoxton needs to come back, let's have him back as a character, please bring him in, they asked Pete, and he came back into the game. If there is an outcry for a character, which to be fair, I would wager for most characters in Payday 2, but maybe H3H3, no offense to them, but I think it's safe to say they're probably some of the least favorite characters in the game. But apart from a couple of heisters such as them, there's going to be an outcry for most characters to come back into the game, so there's definitely going to be people who want to see them return, so it's all really up to Overkill as to how much of a link they want between Payday 2 and Payday 3. But considering Payday 2 has been such a moneymaker for them, and it's been their biggest success, well, I mean, sadly, they haven't had a great deal, many of successes in recent years, but it's been their biggest cash generator, it's been what everyone knows the studio for, so I don't see any trouble with them bringing back characters as DLC, and I think that really, if they're going to bring characters back in Payday 3, that's how they're going to do it. I think that's the best way they could handle bringing in characters, release them as DLC later in the game's life cycle. Once Payday 3 is on its own footing, it's on its own terms, it has its own characters. So to sum up my opinion in terms of characters, I think they will start Payday 3 with a new set of 4 original characters, with their own backstories, with their own information, with their own traits, with their own characteristics, with their own everything, and I really do think, or at least I hope, that they bring Locke in as the announcer, because that sets up the beautiful link between Payday 2 and Payday 3. It's a link that's not super strong, but it's strong enough and stable enough for them to bring characters from Payday 2 and just seed them into Payday 3 slowly if they want to put any characters into the game. And as I've said, the actors are more than willing to come back, at least some of them are. I think as long as there's a demand for them, which there will be, Overkill will consider it at a later date. But to start with, I say 4 original characters, show us you can make some new characters and make them original, make them interesting, but play it by ear once Payday 3 releases, see what people think of the game and the characters, see how much longevity you have for the game in terms of DLC, etc. And I think if you're going to have a lot of DLC like Payday 2, start drip feeding in a couple of old characters. I think that's personally the best way I would do it in their shoes. But that rounds off this discussion video about the characters of Payday 3. If you guys have enjoyed this video, you know the drill. As always, please do consider giving it a thumbs up. It's always very much appreciated. And if you are new around here, please feel free to subscribe because it's quick, it's free, and I'll always love you for doing so. But this will wrap it up for Payday 3 for now. I will be back with another Payday 3 discussion topic video in a few weeks, month or two, I don't know. I'm not really going to plan it because, like I said, I don't want to be the allié of Payday 3. That is the kind of hang-up I have in my head. If I do too many videos, that's how I'm going to be perceived, and that is not what I want. Far from it. If you have any ideas, however, for the next discussion video, any particular topics, such as heists that could return, that was another common one that I think I'll look into. How skills and weapons should work, that's another one I think I'm going to look into. Any topics like that, suggest them down below. Let me know what you want to hear me talk about, and you never know, your topic might be the next discussion video for Payday 3. But until then, guys, hope you've enjoyed the video. I will see you all next week with a brand new video. Until then, guys, take it easy, have a great day, and I'll see you all very soon.